If you had wealth, privilege, and fame, would you walk away from it? Maybe you'd get bored with being recognized, or maybe someone would take it away from you without asking. Then you'd have to fend for yourself. From being dethroned to sweeping up trash, some royal family members have been on a journey, and many never return from that journey, winding up forgotten about or even dead. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 royals who vanished without a trace. 25. The Prince Who Sailed Away. Austria lost a prince when Archduke Johann Salvator of Austria decided to give up his royal life at the House of Habsburg. He didn't just run away, though. He escaped in a boat. Sometimes the life of a wealthy VIP isn't for everyone. So Johann Salvator became plain old Johann Ort, setting sail on a vessel named the Santa Margherita in 1889 after formally renouncing his titles. He was in his late 30s and married to dancer Ludmila Stubel. Johann wanted to see what the world had to offer beyond the palaces of the Habsburg. What did he find? We don't know, because he and Ludmila disappeared. They vanished while crossing the South Atlantic. The couple were later presumed dead. Were they out of their depth literally? Did they run into pirates on the high seas? Or did they hit a storm and sink near Cape Horn, as some believe? The mystery makes this story even more compelling. 24. The Lost King. Edward V is the king England never had. Actually, they had him as king, but lost him after just 2 months. Confused? I'll explain a little more. Edward was officially confirmed as king in 1483, succeeding his father, Edward IV. That said, they never put a crown on his head. Why? Because of a famous historical legend involving Edward's brother, the Duke of Gloucester. The Duke placed Edward and his brother in the Tower of London. According to the Duke's supporters, he wanted to protect them as the War of the Roses was raging in England at the time. Couldn't they make their own decisions? No, they couldn't. You see, Edward was 12, and his brother was 9. If the story is starting to sound familiar to you, I'm not surprised. The boy's uncle would go on to become king himself, a famous king called Richard III. A rumor persists that Richard murdered the kids so he could take the throne, but this is disputed by many historians. Whatever happened, the legendary princes in the tower disappeared, never to be seen again. 23. From crown to common life. Princess Mako of Japan was known for her royal duties and interest in culture before fate changed her plans. A man named Kai Komuro came along, and Princess Mako's days as a member of royalty were numbered. Kai Komuro wasn't a prince or a wealthy aristocrat. He was a legal clerk. That didn't matter to the princess, who surprised those expecting her to follow the line of her famous grandfather, Emperor Akihito. Instead of living it up at the palace, she and her beloved went to New York in 2021, where their relationship has lasted to this day. Princess Mako, as we knew her, effectively vanished to be replaced by a happier person living a civilian life. 22. A royal turned writer. Prince Michael of Greece and Denmark renounced his succession rights to the throne in 1965. Like some royals who get restless, he'd chosen a different life, marrying someone from outside the usual circles. What's especially interesting about Prince Michael is his new job. Instead of attending public events and cutting ribbons, he developed a career as an author and historian. Under the pseudonym of Michel de Grèce, he released around 30 books, both fiction and non. The prince drew on his regal background to bring the stories of historical kings to life, and he took the role seriously. His work received positive reviews, and Prince Michael was still writing in the years leading up to his death in 2024. Many royals have stories written about them, but this guy was the one writing the stories himself. 21. From prince to professional. People doing business in New York in the late 40s may have found themselves dealing with a famous royal. Prince Carl Johan Bernadotte of Sweden was a long way from home, but that's the way he liked it. He left his native country to take a job at the Anglo-Nordic Trading Company. What was he doing there? Prince Carl seemed to prefer the company of traders to tiara-wearing dignitaries, shaking hands and signing contracts before going home to his wife. In fact, getting hitched to a non-royal meant he had to surrender his former status, though he got a good deal out of the situation. The prince didn't completely turn his back on royal life and was sometimes seen at the odd event. Ultimately, however, he was happy to work a normal job and enjoyed a quieter existence. 20. The Creative Prince. Royals never get their hands dirty, right? Actually, they do, as the story of Lennart Bernadotte shows. In his early 20s, he went from leisure to creative landscaping, working in the soil and creating some world-class gardens. Mainau Island is an idyllic spot in Germany, and its lush green spaces were designed by Mr. Bernadotte, who also happened to own the place. Plus, his talents didn't end there. He was highly skilled with the camera, taking snaps and making movies. He even appeared as an actor on screen playing, what else? A prince. Bernadotte's sense of creativity shone through, even when his royal profile faded. He's a rare example of someone who became truly exceptional away from his opulent upbringing. He pretty much vanished without a trace as a royal, but made his mark as a man. 19. The Last Merovingian. Childeric III was king of the Merovingian dynasty, a clan that controlled a tribal network known as the Franks. They lived in a territory that became West Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Despite his great power, he disappeared from public view. How did it happen? Childeric's short reign came to an end in 751, after 8 years in power. It's safe to say he didn't leave on his own terms either. Childeric was overthrown by his successor Pepin the Short, who condemned him to a less than regal fate. The former ruler was banished from the kingdom to live as a monk. A figurehead of the dynasty had basically vanished without a trace. Most humiliating of all was his appearance. Previously, King Childeric had long hair, which was a symbol of his status. Pepin ordered him to have a haircut, leaving him bald and powerless. Talk about rubbing salt in the wound. 18. The Prince Who Never Arrived. Tutankhamun is one of the most famous names in ancient Egyptian history thanks to the discovery of his tomb. There was also a curse connected to that tomb, a story which creates a sense of mystery around the mighty pharaoh. Things get even stranger when we look at what happened immediately after Tutankhamun passed away. His wife intended to marry Prince Zannanza, the son of King Suppiluliuma I. They were Hittites from the land of Anatolia, better known today as Turkey. Unfortunately, something happened along the way. Prince Zannanza never made it to Egypt to tie the knot with Queen Ankhesenamun. It's possible he was murdered for political reasons, but a body was never found. This ancient case of a vanishing royal is one of the oldest of its kind. The disappearance led to a falling out between the Hittites and the Egyptians. A war would follow. 17. Forgotten Princes. The British Empire ruled India for nearly a century, taking control following a rebellion against the all-powerful East India Company. This happened in 1857, when people from Indian aristocrats to farmers objected to the power the British Trading Company and colonial forces in general had over their lives. The stranglehold even affected the monarchy, with the old order being reshaped by foreign bureaucrats. Tensions boiled over into a major rebellion, which was then crushed by the British Army. After this, the country was changed forever, with a devastating impact on the royal line. The Mughal heirs were part of a dynasty going back around 300 years. They used to rule over much of India, but that stopped when their emperor was exiled, leaving the rest at the mercy of their occupiers. Some paid with their lives, some wound up in jail, and others went and lived among regular people. 16. The Fall of a Dynasty. As I mentioned at the start of this list, the Habsburg monarchy lost a prince at sea. As for the whole dynasty, it collapsed in 1918. They had ruled over a vast area of Europe, not for decades, but for whole centuries. What brought down this epic empire? It wasn't just one thing. Their territory now covered what we know as Austria, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. They all used to be part of one place controlled by the Habsburgs. One major event that changed things for them was World War I. Austria-Hungary was on the side of the Central Powers, which fought against the Allied powers. The conflict created economic hardship, which nationalist parties capitalized on. They urged the public to embrace independence. The Habsburgs also went through a crisis of leadership as the old emperor died. Unfortunately, his replacement didn't have luck on his side. Lacking the time to get something organized, his territory broke up, and the Habsburgs gradually faded into history. 15. Exiled sovereigns. When the Ottoman Empire fell in 1922, it marked the end of a 600-year rule. The family was respected because of their high status, but also feared. The Ottomans had enormous power, and with that came an enormous army. They actually had one of the biggest armies on the planet, numbering hundreds of thousands of soldiers at its peak. What's that old expression? The bigger they are, the harder they fall? Yeah, that definitely applied to the Ottomans, whose downfall was connected to money. Despite the luxury lifestyle, they were sitting on a mountain of debt. Their financial mismanagement, plus a rising tide of nationalism and the impact of World War I, led to public discontent, and it was only a matter of time before they were pushed out. They were exiled and vanished from the world stage, settling into more humble lives abroad. Eventually, the authorities asked them back, but they existed as symbols of a bygone age rather than being actually influential. 14. From Dragon Throne to Common Life. Puyi was a member of the Chinese royal family who went from regal to regular in a spectacular fall from grace. The way he did it, however, was more complicated than most. The end of Puyi's reign signaled the end of the Qing Dynasty, which had been in power for over 250 years. In 1912, he was forced to abdicate during the Xinhai Revolution, led by the rebel leader Sun Yat-sen. He did get some power back later in 1934, but this happened unexpectedly. An invasion by Japan led to Puyi becoming a tool of the Imperial army. He was still an emperor, but he worked for a foreign power. Then, World War II happened, and the Japanese were expelled from China. If Puyi thought that would be the end of his troubles, well, he was wrong. He was captured by the Soviets, who threw him in jail. He made it back to China eventually, but it was now the Communist People's Republic. Puyi was re-educated in the ways of Chairman Mao and ended his days as a librarian, not an emperor. Quite the transformation. 13. From Imperial Splendour to Sacred Service. Grand Duchess Elisabeth Feodorovna of Russia gave up royal life through choice. Underpinning that choice, however, was a horrifying atrocity. Her husband, Sergei Alexandrovich, was killed by terrorists during the revolution in 1905, making her reevaluate her existence. Elisabeth went from princess to nun, founding her own convent several years after the Grand Duke's murder. She devoted the rest of her life to helping the poorest and most disadvantaged in Russian society. Fascinating for someone who was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria and who used to hold the title of princess. Sadly, her story has a shocking and violent end. She was murdered by the Bolsheviks during the Russian Revolution, who pushed her down a mine and threw grenades after her. 12. The Forgotten Royal Hidden from History. When George V and his wife Mary had a son in 1905, they discovered he wasn't like a lot of the other children. Prince John's behavior was typical of someone with learning difficulties and epilepsy. It's believed by modern experts that he was also autistic, adding to a series of conditions that weren't properly understood back then. Instead of introducing John to the British public, the family relocated him to the Sandringham estate. He was shamefully hidden away, though it seems to have led a comfortable life. Sadly, he died at the age of 13 from an epileptic seizure. 11. The royal heir who became the Buddha. The image of Buddha is one of the most recognized in the world. But where did it come from? We're looking at the life of Prince Siddhartha Gautama next, whose surprising story inspired this iconic figure. He lived in India around the 5th century BCE, having everything a man could want. Except, that is, enlightenment. That changed after he saw 4 things, collectively known as the 4 sights. They were an old man, a person suffering from sickness, a dead body, and finally, an ascetic. That's someone who has a strong sense of self-discipline. The sights reminded the prince of his mortality and the need to find something more. He sat under the legendary Bodhi tree meditating, and the image stuck. Prince Siddhartha Gautama didn't vanish without a trace, of course. I mean, you can see him everywhere. The man he used to be, however, definitely disappeared. 10. The Queen of Sorrow. When Soraya Esfandiary-Bakhtiary met the Shah of Iran, it was the beginning of a whole new way of life. He married her in the 1950s, and she took the title of Queen. Behind the glamorous image, however, things weren't going so well. The Shah needed an heir, not just for himself, but for the country. This tradition meant everything to him. The Queen wasn't able to give the Shah what he wanted, and by 1958, the relationship had ended. She got divorced and largely disappeared from public view. Her nickname at the time was the Queen of Sorrow, or the Sad-Eyed Princess, and you can see why when you hear about her life. 9. The imperial descendant who rode in silence. Natalia Androsova avoided the life of a pampered royal in one of the coolest ways possible. She took a job as a stuntwoman in the Russian movie business. Little did the people who worked with her suspect that she was a descendant of the illustrious House of Romanov, who ruled Russia between the 1600s and the 1900s. When World War II broke out, Natalia took on fire brigade duties. She would reportedly pick up explosives with her bare hands to stop them from injuring anybody, bar herself. This princess led an action-packed and dangerous life, living to the age of 82, by which time it was the end of the 90s. Her royal persona vanished without a trace, but the rest of her lived on, captured on film for audiences around the world to enjoy. 8. Power, plague, and the vanishing of princes. If there was one royal dynasty that went through a tough time, it was the House of Valois. They managed to reign in France for over 250 years between the 14th and 16th centuries. During that time, the princes were hit with war, notably the 100 Years' War in 1337. Then came the plague, which wiped out even more of the bloodline. Throw in political wrangling plus some assassinations, and you have a family who must have wondered what they did wrong to be treated so badly. 7. The royal who faded from history. Edward the Confessor took the throne of England in 1042, reigned until 1066. By his side was Edith of Wessex, who became queen. Trouble is, we don't know a whole lot about her, which is unusual for someone who had such a prominent position. It's believed she's featured on the famous Bayeux Tapestry, but she doesn't exactly have a starring role. Her place on the tapestry shows her handling the king's feet, not the most flattering or regal of images. She didn't even make it till the end of Edward's reign either, after her father and brothers had a falling out with the monarch. Edith wound up at a nunnery where she disappeared from public life, with very few records to show she ever existed. She did outlive her former husband, though. 6. The monarch who disappeared. When a king vanishes, it's a disaster. When a king vanishes and doesn't leave an heir, it is a complete catastrophe. That was the situation Portugal found itself in after Sebastian I rode off to take part in the Battle of the Three Kings in Morocco. The conflict was particularly brutal, with all three rulers apparently killed. I say apparently because Portugal couldn't say for sure that Sebastian was deceased. The ambiguous scenario dragged on till 1580, when the Spanish king Philip II took charge. While all this was going on, the Portuguese held out hope that Sebastian would return. He became a messiah-like figure as a result, leading to the rise of something called Sebastianism. Unfortunately, this belief system didn't seem to work, and Messiah never came back. 5. The Royal Assassin. There are shocking stories from history about members of the royal family being assassinated. In this case, however, it was a royal who did the assassinating. In 1975, aged just over 30, Prince Faisal bin Musaid al Saud turned on his uncle, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia. His own nephew gunned him down, and what's more, he did it in public, adding to the sense of surprise and alarm. The kingdom struggled to understand why the prince carried out this crime. Even today, there isn't one cause that's been identified. There was certainly a lot of tension over King Faisal's attempts to modernize the royal family. Did the prince feel strongly enough about this to pull a gun on him? He didn't live long enough to reveal the answer, with authorities executing him less than 3 months later, having judged him sane enough to be tried. 4. The Cambodian prince who vanished. The Khmer Rouge governed Cambodia brutally, ruling the population with fear and oppression. Their leader, Pol Pot, stood accused of genocide, erasing around 25% of Cambodians. few were safe from the regime, and that included royalty. Prince Norodom Norodipo had been educated in China and was dubbed Prince of the People. His approach didn't sit well with Pol Pot, and by 1977 he'd vanished. His father, King Norodom Sihanouk, must have been gravely worried, and things got worse when more of his children disappeared. The king's heir was later presumed dead, with a grim question mark hanging over his fate. 3. When Rome took Egypt. The story of Cleopatra is well known, even by those who don't know their history. What's less known is the fact that she had twins with her partner Mark Antony. Cleopatra Selene II and Alexander Helios, together with her brother Ptolemy Philadelphus, should have inherited their mother's status. But instead, world events overtook them. The empire of ancient Egypt was taken over by the Romans in 30 BCE, spelling bad news for anyone in the royal bloodline. Both parents were dead, so drastic action had to be taken to save their lives. According to historical records, Cleopatra, Alexander, and Ptolemy went to live with Mark Antony's wife, Octavia Minor. What happened next? Well, your guess is as good as mine. They vanished off the map, never to be seen again. This story of royal disappearances was far from unusual as the Ptolemaic dynasty collapsed and the Empire of Rome began. 2. The prince who slipped into legend. Today's Prince of Wales is William, who seems like a non-confrontational sort of guy. Back in 1400, there was a whole other vibe to the role. The actual title of Prince of Wales had only been created 100 years earlier, so when Owain Glyndŵr announced himself as the prince, it was a big deal, mainly because the English didn't permit him to do it. Owain was a Welshman, part of a noble line who wanted to rise against King Henry IV. He didn't believe Henry was a legitimate king, plus the treatment of Wales by England was seen as shabby by its population. Owain Glyndŵr wanted to lead a revolution. Just over a decade later, his dream was over. By that time, Henry V was on the throne of England, and he wanted Owain's head. That didn't happen. The rebel vanished, and while some thought he'd return at some point, he never did. His future became a mystery. 1. Royals swept away by revolution. The Bourbon-Parmas were a powerful bloodline, part of the House of Bourbon, which had power bases in both Europe and America. This particular branch was in Italy, though things were going very wrong in the neighboring country of France. The French Revolution of 1789 unleashed fury and violence against the most privileged in society, leading to other revolts and a restructuring of society. The House of Bourbon-Parma found itself in trouble. Those who weren't thrown in jail were exiled, and they were the lucky ones. Others got killed, which led to a rapid decline for the family. Historians know about them. Now you know about them. They're still around today, though they're nowhere near as powerful. The world moved on, and their ancestors were kind of swept under the rug of history. Our video today shows that even the most powerful people can disappear, like a pebble in the lake of history. That said, other royals are so memorable, they'll never be forgotten. We have a video on the craziest things you might not know about kings ready to watch right here. As always, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content, and I'll catch you next time. Don't forget about me.